Good morning and welcome to the first Unitarian Summer Forum. This is our second to last forum, and I think this whole summer has gone really, really well. It's been fantastic. But if it's our second to the last, that means that the summer is almost over. Where did that go? Where did that go? First of all, I want to thank Mark for organizing the forum and doing such a wonderful job of keeping us all together. And Tristan, of course, for his tech support up there. Our greeter and our ushers and the people making coffee for us afterwards, thank you to all of them. Our subject this morning is how Unitarian Universalism shows up for our young people. And our speaker is Jennica Davis-Hockett. She is the UUA Youth Ministry Specialist. She's from the Office of Youth and Young Adult Ministries. Jennica started out right here at this church, at First Unitarian Church. And in her youth, she went through the youth programs, went to the cons, really looked forward to those, and went on some of our youth service projects. And then she moved on to become the youth advisor, program coordinator, and religious education assistant for the First Church. And that included taking a group of youth to New Orleans after Katrina to help in a service cleanup project. Then she went on to District Youth Ministry Consultant for Mountain Desert, Regional Youth Ministry Specialist for Pacific Western, and now UUA Youth Ministry Specialist. She is the co-convener of the Youth Ministry Roundtable.
You can skip that part because it's old, but do that part.
Do this part?
Yeah.
I'm almost there. A cross-departmental team including folks from Lifespan, Faith Engagement, and Congressional Life, and UU College of Social Justice, and she is the editor of the second edition of Youth Ministry Advising, A Complete Guide. She is the program lead for Summer Seminary and Luminary Leaders. Jennica writes, most local youth ministries around the country did not remain intact over the course of the pandemic, for reasons of which are multi-layered and systemic. Of course, supporting our young folks in making Unitarian Universalism their spiritual home is vital to our post-pandemic recovery as a faith movement. Jennica will speak about the UUA initiative based on the wisdom of religious educators in the field and youth themselves to support congregations' commitment to reseeding youth ministries. Jennica.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad to be here and glad to be standing at this podium. How is my sound? Okay, great. So I'm especially happy to be here and excited because my whole family is here. I've got my parents, I've got my spouse, I've got my son, and I also see we have some other little ones here. So, hi. Hi. You know, church is really one of the few remaining places where we get to do intergenerational community together. We're really so often separated by age or by life stage, and so it feels kind of magical in the 21st century to be able to do this kind of multi-generational community together. So everyone of every age is welcome to stay as long as they want, and of course, if the playground starts to call, feel free to go play on the playground as well, but if little ones are wandering up and down the aisles, I hope you'll welcome them because, you know, we may be satisfied exploring our space with just our eyes, but little ones really need to explore the space with their whole bodies, so I hope we'll all welcome that. where do I want to begin? Okay, so a little bit about why I do youth ministry and why I am standing up here today is I believe that it is vitally important that we trust our young people, that we trust their voices, that we trust their leadership, that we trust what they have to say for themselves about what is important, and that we practice a little bit of followership when it comes to our young people. And I also believe that youth inclusion is all our jobs. It's not the job of one person at the church, or not the job of just parents or just youth to be advocates for themselves. I truly believe that each of us has a role in welcoming young people into our community and making sure that this community is accessible to them. And I also believe that it's not what we do that's important. I mean, we can have amazing, perfect programs that might draw people in, but if we're not welcoming, if we're not inclusive, if we're not accessible, if we're not warm and inviting and listening and respecting, then folks aren't going to stay. So I believe it's more about how we are rather than what we do. So here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to give you kind of the flyover picture of what youth ministry looks like in our Unitarian Universalist Association. And then I'm going to give you some very good reasons to listen to young people, really just as you can tell, I'm not a teenager, and we don't have any teenagers here today in person speaking up here, but we do, I think, have some in the audience, so not to put you on the spot, but we are going to have some time to pass around the mic, and I'm going to do a progressive stack. So that means if you're young and you've got an idea, you go to the top of the mic list, and then we'll bounce back and forth like that. But I do have some folks, I've done some interviews, and I have some folks that we'll hear from today. And then we're going to locate ourselves in this really important moment and think about what gifts that we have to bring to this moment. And here's what we are not going to do today. We're not going to come up with any technical fixes or silver bullets or magic potions that's going to be able to fix any challenges we face today. And we're also not going to be placing blame or fault on any one person or any system. It is really, really complicated why our churches are struggling to maintain really vibrant youth communities right after the pandemic. Oh my gosh, there's a mask as a hat on that baby back there. Yes, okay. So that's a little bit about me. That's what I bring into the room, and now I want to know a little bit about you and what you bring into the room. So I'm going to run through a list of things, and if it applies to you and you want to, please raise your hand. If it applies to you but you don't want to, you don't need to raise your hand. We're just going to get a little sense of who's in the room. And we're also going to actually bring the Zoom folks up on the big screen. So this is your warning. If you want to turn your camera off or you're still in your PJs, feel free to not use your camera. There's a little icon button that you can press to raise your hand or to do a check mark or a thumbs up. That's so great. All right. So raise your hand if you are new to UU. If you're new to Unitarian Universalism, you're a visitor, you've been here maybe a couple times, or this is even your first time, awesome. Okay. Raise your hand if you are a lifelong Unitarian Universalist or have been a Unitarian Universalist for a very long time. Okay, awesome. Raise your hand if you're somewhere in between. You're not new and you're not awesome. Yes, oh yes, and each of these questions, you may very well raise your hand multiple times. Raise your hand if you serve on a committee or the board of the First Unitarian Church. Wahoo. And raise your hand if you are an atheist. Raise your hand if you're agnostic. If you're a theist. Raise your hand if you are multi-religious, so maybe you're a Buddhitarian or a pagan universalist, or awesome, awesome. Raise your hand if you're single, if you're a parent, if you have a partner or partners. Awesome, yes. And if you've got children in the house. And if you've got adult children. Oh my goodness, all right. Raise your hand if you, I should be raising my hand for these too, sorry. Lifelong UU, multi-religious, partner and children in the house. Okay, raise your hand if you identify as lesbian or gay or bisexual or queer. Raise your hand if you identify as trans or non-binary. Raise your hand if you identify as Black or Indigenous or a person of color and or a person of color. Raise your hand if you identify as white. Raise your hand if you belong to a multicultural family. Sweet. If you belong to the silent generation. The generation older than boomers. Mm-hmm. Awesome, yes. Okay, raise your hand if you're a boomer. Raise your hand if you're in Gen X. Yeah, I see there's a lot of cuspers here. Raise your hand if you're a millennial. I feel like I'm a cusper of the millennial. How about if you are an emerging adult? So emerging adults are 18 to 24. Sweet. Raise your hand if you are a youth, so 14 to 18. See, no, okay, that's good, very good information, very good data. Raise your hand if you're in middle school. Awesome. Raise your hand if you are in elementary school or younger. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So we've got a lot of diversity in this room. And my hope is that today we are, I need to put my timer up here. My hope is that today we are able to share from our own voices and our own wisdom, because it's in sharing of those differences and sharing in that diversity that we are able to come up with our best ideas. So I want to introduce you to also somebody on in our PowerPoint. This is Sunny Cornick-Fuke, and Sunny is a young adult who was part of the Young Adults at General Assembly Planning Committee, and these YAs at GA's staff group are paid by the Unitarian Universalist Association to come up with programming and to create inclusive space at General Assembly for young adults. And one of the things they do is put on a service every year called Synergy, and Synergy is the bridging worship service. So in our tradition, when folks move from youthhood to young adulthood, and they get to define when that is, maybe it's when they graduate high school or get their GED, maybe it's when they move out of their parents' house, or maybe it's when they start school, but it's usually within that 18 to 19 range, although, I mean, some folks are 16 and starting college classes, so it's really about a life stage more than an age. They cross the bridge from youthhood into adulthood, and they're welcomed on the other side of the bridge by young adults and by their elders. And this is Sunny talking about what it was like to come of age in a pandemic and what it has been like to emerge as a young adult in that pandemic.
Good evening. My name is Sunny Cornick-Fuke, and my pronouns are they and them. After a great calamity, what does it take for a community to replant interdependence? This is the question that drives our worship today, that informs the moment we enter into together here. For a generation of young people, we have known such disruptions through these multiple pandemics we've been facing. The horizon of what was expected has invariably shifted. For all of us in this faith community, the life of our religious communities together have changed. From a moment of precarity, what does regrowing take? The past few years, I too have been pondering this question and its many answers. When the first pandemic started, I was a senior in the class of 2020. I, like all seniors, was preparing for the part of school I had waited 11 and a half years for. I was filled with excitement, anxiety, and most of all, curiosity for what comes next. Then, in the blink of an eye, most of that went away, replaced by fear, depression, and more anxiety. What I and many others have learned the past few years is that the only consistent thing in life is change. If you had asked me in January of 2020 who I was, the answer would have been wildly different to what I would say if you had asked me today. It's one of those times when, while you're in it, it just really sucks to experience. But afterwards, you're able to look back and say, hey, that was pretty incredible in its own way. Maybe it wasn't fun to experience, but I wouldn't be the same person I am today had I not had that experience.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And I want to give an extra special shout out to Tristan because we had a conversation about accessibility before going live, and the value that I place on making sure we have captions for all our videos so that for folks who want to read and listen at the same time or need to read to really be able to catch all the words, that we were making space for that. So Tristan put extra amount of work in this morning to try to do that for us. Okay, so there's one perspective from a young person of what it was like to move through a pandemic, to come of age during a pandemic. And I've also spoken with religious educators all over the country. There's an association called the Liberal Religious Educators Association that really advocates for religious education, supports our religious educators, and does an amazing amount of collaboration to bring all of the programs and the ministries that Unitarian Universalism has to offer for all ages. It's not just for children and youth, it's lifespan religious education. So they meet in chapters, and my colleague Reverend Stevie Carmody and I met with almost all of the chapters across the country to say, what is youth ministry like and emerging adult ministry like for you right now? And this was 21-22 church year. And so many of them said that they've lost their hours, that their hours have been cut, that funding has been cut, and at the same time that they've taken on more responsibility. A lot of the religious educators also became the tech person. A lot of religious educators also took on extra pastoral care responsibility for families. And they also said that what was vital to just making it through the pandemic was connecting with other congregations. So maybe that looked like sharing programming or staff or even ministers in the pulpit to be able to really be stronger together. And they also said that what worked to keep youth through the pandemic was structured community building. So it was kind of the time when a lot of the really in-depth conversations that we like to have in our young people classes, that was put on the side for a moment while we focused on the community building aspects. And they also talked a lot about how play was really, really important. Play and celebration during these really hard times, so important, and that actually having that trust and that relationship with each other was what allowed folks to survive Zoom ministry for 2 years, or what allowed folks to be willing to go deep together in conversations about dismantling white supremacy and our eighth principle and other oppressions. My other colleague, Eric Bliss, sent out a 3-question survey to all religious educators in the Pacific Western region. So Salt Lake is located in the Pacific Western region. There are 5 regions in the Unitarian Universalist Association. And he had 3 questions. Do you have high schoolers attending youth group or religious education regularly? If so, how many? And why do you think that is? So I've got a chart that shows, he asked each area, but this is the summary for the entire region. So 36% of congregations said, yeah, we've got youth attending. 20% said no, and the vast majority, 44%, said it's complicated. And with the question of how many youth showed up, on the next slide you'll see that really the vast majority say less than 5 youth are coming. So when you think about our location in this congregation, we're not alone, we're not isolated, it isn't a Salt Lake thing, it isn't a Utah thing. This is happening in a lot of places that we've had a hard time retaining our youth over the pandemic. So for the people that said it's complicated, or they responded, yes, we are having youth coming through the pandemic, they said that reliable consistency was really important, and that providing a ministry of presence was really big. So even if folks weren't coming to church, they were getting messages or notes in the mail saying, you're important to us, you're welcome anytime, we love you even when we don't see you. Another thing people said was really important is resourcing young people by giving them jobs in the congregation, whether that be as tech support or nursery care or in the office, or it didn't have to necessarily be related to religious education, but really giving young people money to be able to make it through the pandemic was very important. They also said that there is, frankly, no capacity to run things the way they used to be run. There's no more going back to before times. Parents don't have a capacity, volunteers don't have capacity, staff doesn't have capacity, that we're really moving into a new way of being in community together that is just not going to look like the before times. And the last thing they said was, we have had to innovate. It wasn't because we had all this extra time and space that we could think of brilliant new ideas. It was by necessity. We had to come up with new ways to be able to do things together and to be able to meet the needs of the moment. So, you heard Sonny mention my colleague Shannon Harper, who is the co-director of the Lifespan Faith Engagement Office, and that's the office that I belong to. And we support religious education and religious educators through the Lifespan at the UUA. Shannon Harper came up with this really excellent story about what it was like to go through a pandemic as a community. So on the next slide, I'll read this out since the text is a little small. So before the pandemic, the landscape of youth ministry, or the landscape of ministry in general, was functional, but it was an old design. We'd been adapting it and changing it over decades, and there were areas that had died off or been overgrown, and the shade of some really large plants choked out the new sprouts. And we would look for empty spots that needed to be filled, but we weren't always communicating with each other, so we would plant on top of each other. And we lost track of the old design, and yet there was still enough evidence of that original design and of the people who remembered it to get in the way of something completely new being created. We knew it needed to change, but the idea of starting over was overwhelming when we had too many plants on life support and couldn't all decide what should be nurtured next. And then we had a pandemic. We watched as the waters flooded our landscape, all of the plants and design gone. We went into emergency mode, salvaging what we could, creating lifeboats from what materials we had. We clung to the few sturdier trees that were rooted enough to withstand the current. And mostly, we tried to laugh and console each other through the despair of not knowing how our garden was ever going to grow again. And we tell this story amongst us often because we don't want to skip over the grief of what we lost during the pandemic. And we think actually being aware of that, experiencing that, sharing that is part of how we're going to be able to move forward together. So, mid-pandemic, actually beginning of the pandemic, remember in that honeymoon phase when we were like, okay, we can do this, we can really pool together, let's keep our community strong. We had a program called Faith Lab, which my mom mentioned summer seminary earlier. Faith Lab was the online version of summer seminary. And I'm going to introduce you to two young folks who participated in this program. Here comes my baby. Ooh, come on up. And these two young folks who participated in this program were just brimming with like wonder and wisdom. And so as we watch these two folks talk, I would like you have an index card and a pen. Maybe it's on the end of the aisle and you can pass it down to your neighbors. Awesome. My dad's walking around with extra index cards and pens for those who need it. Just pick one or two wise things that you hear come from these young folks. Wise things you hear come from these young folks. Because the truth is, we weren't on pause. Sometimes it feels like we treat the pandemic as it was this pause time, and now it's time to get back to things as normal as possible. But this was a really transformational time, especially for young folks. So this first person is Annie J. And Annie J chose to focus her final project for Faith Lab on two ideas, ministry and abolition. Ministry and abolition, because we heard about the ways that the Unitarian Universalist churches over the years have both been abolitionist but also pro-slavery. So this is Annie J talking about what she learned at Faith Lab.
My two topics were abolition and ministry. And I chose abolition because abolition and slavery are such an important part of our history, and I had never learned about it before. So I thought it was super interesting to learn about and important to think about. And then I also chose ministry because I was really struck by all of the forms it can take, which I had never thought about or realized as well. So I took the before and after, how you've changed, quite literally. And so the left side of this drawing is before Faith Lab, what I perceived Unitarian Universalism to be, what it was for me. So there is a person standing at a pulpit in a church, because that's kind of what I thought Unitarian Universalism was. It was going to the church, listening to someone sermonize. Honestly, it was a little boring sometimes. Not my mom's sermons, but a lot of the other ministers' sermons kind of went over my head. I was kind of sitting there. But the music was amazing. I always loved hymns, and I was always really excited when we got to sing as a congregation. And then I also really did not know the history of Unitarian Universalism. I really did not know much about it. And then on the right side, it's a lot more vibrant. There's a lot more going on, because I have realized that Unitarian Universalism is a much more vibrant community. There's so many more parts in it, and it's more, but there's both more positive and negative aspects. So the colorful shapes and symbols represent emerging ministries. They're kind of emerging out of the pulpit, and they represent that ministry can be it can be through technology, it can be through helping people. It doesn't have to be super religious. And the sun represents being outside, that ministry doesn't have to be in a church. It can be out in your communities, it can be making music, or it can be sharing the love. And then the hands at the bottom, these represent slavery and how it is a part of our past. It's connected to us through our ancestors. And I feel like a lot of Unitarian Universalists might just assume or expect that, we've always been pro-abolition, and of course our ancestors were pro-abolition. But in reality, some of them were, but some of them were moderates, and some of them were even pro-slavery. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, even though we don't want to think about it. And then I put it towards the bottom to represent that a lot of our churches have been built using money from the slave trade, which I had not realized that, and it really struck me. And then all of this is inside of a chalice because it's all part of Unitarian Universalism. The after doesn't replace the before. It's all still part of my Unitarian Universalism, still part of my faith, and it's now just a lot more.
Yeah, thank you. So that's Annie, who at the time of faith, this was 2020, so Annie was in 10th grade, and what else do I have on Annie? She's white, and she identifies as a woman, and she's from California, and she was really struck by the different kinds of emerging ministry that Universal has going on. And next we're going to hear from Malika Gottfried, who is reflecting on an Angela Herrera poem that I didn't share the whole thing with, but reflecting on ideas of identity and ministry. So Malika is a multiracial 11th grader who identifies as a woman from Oregon.
The name of the holy is pronounced through your being. The first time that I heard that poem, I felt it in my whole body. We are all a part of a bigger story, a bigger timeline than ourselves. What we do is important, but what do we do that is vital to anyone but ourselves? When we first journaled about this in our small group, my notebook was full of arrows and question marks. How do we live our lives with meaning if we don't even matter? But the more I think about it, the more I realize that it's not that we don't matter, it's that in the big picture of the world and life itself, our lives don't have to be as serious as we make them. In our workshop with Reverend Soto, they told us that the things we say and do don't have to be final. There is almost always a chance to try again, and the point of life is to have fun and make choices that are good for us. By putting things in perspective, we can live our lives with more ease and meaning, but that is definitely easier said than done. People's experiences shape their thoughts and ideas and how they move in the world. My experiences are my identities, are my thoughts, are how I interact with people, are how I move in the world. Each person's individual experience is different, and we are all different. We are all a part of this world where it seems like we're going through something without knowing what it is we are actually going through. So keeping things in perspective is vital. It is vital to our sanity, to our conversations, to our faith. What is the bigger picture? How do our experiences shape our perspectives? How can we make room for other perspectives while honoring our own experiences when they might not intersect as nicely as we would want them to? These are some of the questions I have found myself asking over the past month. And frustratingly enough, I don't have the answers, and I don't think anyone has the answers. That brings me to the next theme, ministry. To me, part of ministry is about exploring those questions and about exploring the unknown. It is about being open to the questions that don't have answers, being curious in all that we do, and being okay with living in a bit of uncertainty. Part of being okay with living with that uncertainty is being in tune to what is always present. Like Reverend Dr. Tandeka told us, our feelings connect us to life. We need to be held in life itself, whether that is God, the universe, or something else. If we are held in life, it is okay to not know everything. That's another one of the things that I struggle with, being okay with not knowing. It's obvious that we can't know it all, but it still feels so hopeless sometimes to not know where to go or what to do or how to respond. This is where letting go comes in. Again, easier said than done. During the past month, I was doing a program called Thrive for Youth of Color in this faith. In one of our most recent meetings, one of the adult leaders talked about how it is one thing to be right and another thing to be effective. Over the past few months, I have had countless conversations that have left me feeling exhausted and unsatisfied. Part of me feels like it is my responsibility to have these conversations, but I also know that I need to let go of some of them because they are not serving either party. There are some people I have stopped interacting with one-on-one because I don't feel safe talking to them about race, even if I have been friends with them for years. There comes a time when your words lose their power, where it is better to stop talking than to continue talking because it won't make a difference to them, but it will take a big toll on you. Through Faith Lab and Thrive, I have learned that it is okay to unfollow and block people on Instagram. It is okay to stop wasting your energy on people who do not care. And in fact, sometimes that is good, and it is the best thing for you to do. My ministry, how I can serve myself, is to invest in intentional conversation. Conversation that is guided by our 7 principles. Reciprocal conversation that is guided by my spirituality and by this faith. Being a UU is a practice, and we can and should practice it in everything we do.
Great. So we're about to move into the offering, and as we do, I'll give you another second or two to write down your one wise thing that you heard Molly or Annie, both or either, say. And then, when we take that time to greet our neighbor, please share with your neighbor what that wise thing was that you heard. And then after the collection, we'll share some out into the room. And so for our Zoom friends, just write your one thing that you heard in the chat, and then that way everybody gets to read everybody's while we're doing the collection. How do you want to do the mentioning the Katie Tyson? You want to do yours, and then I'll do mine for the Katie Tyson?
Oh, okay. Do you want to do Katie first? Okay. The offering will now gratefully be accepted. And you have little cards in the pocket in front of you, QR code cards, and you can do it through that way. And this helps to support the summer forum. So thank you for your generous offering.
All right, so you guys have a lot to do during this offering. 1, donate to this church. 2, I want to introduce you to the Katie Tyson Fund, which is an incredibly important fund for the Unitarian Universalism. It supports youth and young adults in their leadership development and in their spiritual and faith development in Unitarian Universalism. So oftentimes it goes to the funds are used to start community projects or to help folks get to General Assembly or to other immersion experiences. So in addition to donating to First Unitarian today, I would just be so over the moon if you would be willing to give to the Katie Tyson Fund. Katie Tyson is she was a young adult who was aspiring to go into the ministry, And she and a friend got in a car accident on her way home from General Assembly in Salt Lake back in 99 maybe, or not two GAs ago when it was here, and she passed away. So her late mom and dad started this fund to be able to support other young folks who are wanting to really stay connected to the faith. So to do so, you would just text Katie, Katie, to 91999. Okay, I hate to break up a good conversation. So let's all have one conversation. Let's take a couple of minutes. Anybody want to share their wise thing that they heard from Molly or Annie? Yeah. Oh, wait, before we do, I just want to say thank you, Dad, for having the music for today. That was Phil Davis's. Yeah. This is a family production. All right.
Annie J. said, sermons are boring and went over my head, but she loved the music. I could relate to that.
I was really taken with the importance of there being a continuum of what ministry is, and that everybody doesn't go to the church in the same place and at the same time and with the same people, and that exploring that church and being in your church, your spiritual community, can happen in many different ways.
Awesome. Let's do two more.
She said many wonderful things, but it really struck me that she said, what we say and do doesn't need to be final.
Yes, yes.
Something Annie J said was, we are all going through something without actually understanding what we're going through.
Yep.
Let's have one more, because Phil's very insightful.
Yes, yes.
I'm not sure about that, but I like that how she ended the talk, saying that being a UU is practice, and I think that resonates with me because I think this is something that we build because we don't have a dogma that we fall back on. It's what we build.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's some chills. Thank you. Thank you. So definitely share the ones that. Oh, and can we get some from? Are there any gems from Zoom you're willing to share, Tristan?
Yeah, it looks like Sheldon Bradshaw says, wise thing, prioritizing the creation of a safe environment to have conversation within.
Yeah.
That's what we got.
Cool. Okay, where are we now? So that was a little bit about how we got to where we are, and where are we now? So on this next slide is actually the end of Shannon's story. It's the future, and we wish we were in the future, but guess what? We're just not. But we are looking towards a future where we have designed a new landscape, taking into consideration everyone who uses and enjoys our garden. It's accessible, diverse, and spacious. Blooms and fruits are growing. There's a bridge and a path to other gardens and lands and places just to sit and think. We care for this garden together, sharing the tasks of maintenance and planting. Every new addition is considered in relationship to the original design, and we are willing to edit and change the blueprint when new ideas are brought forward. Won't it be nice when we get there? And this idea that, we have this future vision because in 2021 we went through a long and detailed visioning process that included a lot of young voices, and We focused on what the theological and ethical mandate of youth ministry is, what it means to reckon with our past, which is like a whole other sermon, and what care and safety in our community means, and what the logistical structures are that will help us get there. And from that, we designed are designing, I should say, a congregational promise program. So raise your hand if you've heard of the Welcoming Congregations program. I bet you anything First Church is a welcoming congregation. And that means that First Church has done some work to understand what it means to be welcoming to lesbian, gay, bi, and queer folks, and trans and non-binary folks. And raise your hand if you've heard of the Green Sanctuary program. Yeah, okay, so Green Sanctuary is a commitment to be, maybe carbon neutral. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but committing to be greener. Yes, and this Congregational Promise Program is going to be a promise that we make to our young folks to be more inclusive and more accessible to young folks. So that's around the corner. And an important part of that Congregational Promise Program is just what I said at the top, that youth ministry is really everyone's ministry. So it's designed for each committee in the congregation to have a vital role in bringing youth ministry up. Okay, on this next slide, this is actually where we are. We're in a liminal time. The waters are receding, the landscape has completely changed, so many things have been washed away completely. Some trees are still here, some seedlings are starting to cautiously peek out, but the rains are still unpredictable, and we can't start replanting yet. But we can create other places for people to enjoy in the interim, places that require minimal maintenance so that we can focus energy on clearing away and tilling in the remnants of the garden. Of the last garden, dreaming up a new landscape design, gaining tools needed to create and care for it, and healing ourselves and the land. So this is where we are. We're in this liminal time where it isn't yet time to do all the rebuilding, but we still need things to care for ourselves and care for each other in this liminal time. So for Shannon Harper, this liminal time is all about Shannon Harper has this idea of a liminal action plan. And a liminal action plan is something that is temporary, that prepares you for what comes next, that is energy efficient, like life force energy efficient, and is clear and boundaried. Her liminal action plans are trauma and grief informed. It really recognizes what we've been through together. And it's forgiving and it's healing. So it's also responsive, relational, playful, shared, about collaboration and about dreaming. So as we're thinking of building these liminal zones to support and care for each other, my question to you is, what brings you into this community? If you have been around for a long time, what keeps you committed? If you're brand new, what drew you here? And because my hunch is that those are the same things that draw young people to this community and and those are the things that young people want to really embody in this community. So we'll pass around the mic again, and I would especially, not to put you on the spot, of course, you can opt out, you can pass, but I would especially love to hear from our young folks what brought you here today, or why do you keep coming back?
Oh, come on.
Sorry. We came here because we knew that you guys would be okay with the kids. But also, it's just kind of few and far between to have real nice people. And it's really just nice to know that you guys are all more or less really nice.
Thank you.
I was a student at Westminster College just down the street. I'd moved here from Northwest Wyoming to Salt Lake City to finish school. And I heard about Summer Forum. was in the fall, and a doctor, I don't remember his name, I want to say Dr. Jarvis, I'm not sure, was giving a summer forum about the Affordable Care Act. And that was way back in 2004. That's what brought me here initially.
Yeah, I had been involved with New Age and New Thought communities after leaving Mormonism in 2003, and which are very inwardly kind of focused, developing the inner self. But when Trump got elected, I realized that I wanted my spirituality to also encompass more the outward practice and kind of moving away from being totally focused inwardly and focus more outwardly.
I'm here because Jennica started coming to the church, and she thought it was such an inspiration and got our family involved. And I'm still here. She's kind of moved on to other things, but I come for the friendship and the people that I've met here.
I came to Unitarianism in Pocatello, Idaho, and one of the things that small congregations have their own set of challenges, and one of the things that gave me the most satisfaction was taking our youth to cons. I was just a driver, but it's the West, and sometimes that means driving 8 hours. And the kids got a lot of, I think that it was a great thing for them, and it was a great thing for the drivers too.
So con is short for conference, and these are youth-led, youth-designed weekend experiences that it's all about social justice, it's all about worship, it's all about building new friendships, and actually my first con boyfriend was his son. Okay, can we get one or two from online?
Yeah. Let's see. Liz Waite says, what brought me to UU was the genuine openness to ideas and exploration of ideas without judgment that comes from focus on doctrine. Sheldon Bradshaw says, as an emerging adult of 21, I'm here because I'm aware of my own limits as an individual, and I wish to work together as a community. Joan Gregory says, I came here back in 1992 when my kids were young, and I thought they needed a religious community. What I learned was that I needed this community, and I've been here ever since.
Oh my gosh. Okay, I love that. And Joan Gregory's son was a recent advisor at First Church, and I was the advisor when Brian was a youth. So that kind of intergenerational leadership is really important to this community as well. So I want to make sure that we have any time for questions. And so the last thing that I want to say is that I was able to talk to two former youth that really, the youth group made a really big impact on who they became and who they are becoming. And in addition to the things that y'all mentioned, they also said that it was, their names are Matilda and Victoria. And they talked about how important being able to explore gender identity is and sexuality through our Whole Lives program that is about sex and sexuality education. They also said that ritual was very important to them, being able to explore ways of making meaning, and that community of care. High school years are rough. A lot of years are rough. Being able to be in community when really rough things are happening and have that reliable and stability was very important to them. They said that it was really important to them to explore the identities that were in the room. Victoria is autistic, and she lamented that there wasn't a lot of space to talk about autism or disability in the room, and that being able, the times that they did have conversations around autism were really important to her and felt very validating. And last, that the service trips, these big, these are like very high capacity service trips that require a lot of parental support and volunteer support, as well as money and staff support. Those made a huge impact on a young person's sense of identity as a social change agent, and being able to have their eyes open to oppression and injustice. They've carried that forward and made career decisions based on that. So those are some in addition to what was brought up in the room about why come to church. And this, I think, Cecilia has the perfect 13-second summary of what youth ministry is all about.
To me, youth ministry is about being there for one another, helping each other whenever we can, and really fostering an environment that is safe, inclusive, and welcoming.
So we have a saying in the Lifespan Faith Engagement Office that good youth ministry is just ministry. I think we're all looking for a place that is welcoming and inclusive and feels safe. So I don't know how much time we have for questions or ideas, but I wanted to, on this last slide, this is a gift from a colleague named Reverend Kimberly Quinn Johnson. She taught me that covenant, which is the promises or the agreements that we make with each other to stay in relationship with each other, covenant is where shared gifts meet collective needs. So we are at a high need time, and luckily we're also at a high gift time. So I would love for you to write on your sticky note one of the gifts that you bring to a youth-inclusive spiritual community. And they might be at the end of the aisle and be ready to pass down to neighbors. And raise your hand if you don't have a sticky note. What is one gift you bring to a youth-inclusive spiritual community? And then on your way out, you can add it to our Youth Inclusive Spiritual Community Board so that we can save these ideas and really build towards them as we move towards the future. And as you're doing that, I'm totally open to any questions, any ideas, anything that you want to share with the community. And while you're formulating your questions, I just want to close by saying thank you so much for bringing your whole selves here today, being willing to do a little participatory adventure and making space in this congregation, giving the mic to the voices of young folks. It really makes a difference.
Any questions before we close?
Thanks. I really like when you said give the youth jobs to do, but then you said and pay them. I assume that didn't mean we shouldn't also be giving the youth volunteer opportunities. Are there any models of volunteer opportunities that are like owned by youth that you would suggest churches consider?
Yeah, and I definitely do mean pay youth. Pay young people. And Unitarian Universalist Youth Ministry is built on the concept of youth empowerment, of really taking a partnership with adults to help youth gain leadership skills and deepen their spirituality. So yes, there are definitely models. The one I like the best, I don't have a picture of it, but it shows that as a young person grows in their skill and also their capacity. So it might start out with a lot of adult leadership and not very much youth leadership. But then as that young person grows in skill and capacity, they can take on much more of the leadership. And there's never not adult involvement, but the adult involvement becomes more supportive. It can be more in the background, and it can even be a process of creating learning or supporting youth through learning experiences of acceptable failure as well, not always pulling it through. Ooh, we got a Zoom one. And then, yeah.
Here's a question from Starlin. She asks, could you please give a quick summary of UUA and how we engage with them?
Okay, so the Unitarian Universalist Association is the way we are organized collectively. So every congregation has its own, we do congregational polity. So y'all make your own decisions about how to run this church. And then we all come together as an association to support each other to do the business of running church well. And that is the Unitarian Universalist Association. So we've got employees that work for congregational life and lifespan faith engagement. We also have people who are ensuring that a personnel committee or a finance committee is working towards making sure staff are at the correct living wage compensation rate, and it's how the Unitarian Universalist Association is like our big covenant with each other of how we agree to be together.
I just was wondering about the OWL program, the OWL Our Whole Lives program. If you or anybody else would care to talk about, if you were in the program, as a young person, let's just limit it to, if there was one thing you could say about it, what would that be?
Anybody gone through the Our Whole Lives program that's here today? Oh, would you be willing to share? Yes.
I think one thing that I took from that program that I didn't realize that I took was just the openness to speak about sex and identity and who you are. And that, as an adult, has been really helpful in my transition to being a parent and being able to help my children and their friends and also like have those open and honest conversations about sex and identity and boundaries. And yeah, it's really powerful.
So Jennica, you had the very vivid description of how our old way of doing ministry, doing church, has been washed away by a flood, and that we're now in a period where the waters are receding and we are wanting to plant some new things, and we can plant new things. Can you say something very specific? Can you give a specific example of something that is gone forever and something that is now sprouting?
Yeah, okay, that's an excellent question. So, and gone forever is kind of a tricky term, because I think there are seeds and fruits from what once was that we want to bring forward into this new future. But for example, in the introduction, it was mentioned a program called Luminary Leaders, which was really about highlighting youth leadership. And they'd get a pin and a certificate and some recognition. And there was an era when that was really important. And then when community care, when creating a leaderful system became more important during the pandemic, we realized, oh, it wasn't as valuable, it's not as valuable to just give kids a certificate and say, now you're a leader. That took a lot of administrative capacity. So we're shifting to creating a more leaderful environment where it's not just the cool kids that get the certificate, but that we're really raising up a generation of leaders. Same thing with summer seminary. A lot of these very cost-intensive, small niche programs that would maybe serve 20 youth across the country and be very expensive to attend, we're going to take some of the essence, the goodness, the ministry that was providing, and try to move it back into the congregation so that more youth have the opportunities that only a few youth had before the pandemic. Any more onlines? Or do we need coffee? Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Jennica, for this inspiring forum. And thank you for bringing home our religious community's commitment to our youth, to support them and to support their families, and to acknowledge their inherent worth and dignity, to foster the potential of our future spiritual leaders. And I know you've inspired me to help our youth. Lastly, well, we have two more things, quick things, and one is talking about the future. Linda Smith, the chair of our search for a new minister, is going to come up and update us on that. After that, Mark has a couple closing words, and then it'll be coffee and conversation. For new people today, there is a welcoming table out there. Please stop by and join us for coffee.
Thank you. I don't want to take too much of your time. How many of you were not here last week that heard the introductory stuff? Okay, great. I'm going to give the introductory stuff again. The search for a new minister is very much driven by UUA protocol. Our committee has a lot of work to do, and our first work is soliciting your information and ideas. That's going to begin probably next month with the launch of our survey. It's longish. We're working very hard to make it accessible online, best by a computer, but also by a laptop, or not a laptop, a phone, a tablet. We want as many of you as possible to complete that survey. It tells us not only what you're wanting, but who you are, who we are as a congregation. After that, we're going to move into October, having focus groups and cottage group meetings. If you have an idea of what should be a focus group, say, the youth, and there's a meeting time when the youth meet, let us know that you think the youth should be a focus group, and when you meet and when we should be there to solicit your ideas in a different way. Fall is going to be discernment, finding out who we are and what we're looking for in a new senior minister. By the end of November, we'll be sharing that with the UUA, and then they'll be sharing that with ministerial candidates. We won't know who the candidates are until the very beginning of January. And at that point, we switch into a pretty confidential search where fall, everybody gets to know what everybody's thinking. There's nothing secret about what we're doing. But because of the need to protect confidentiality of candidates, during the January, February, March area, the committee's work is going to be very heavily involved in screening and interviewing candidates. Ultimately, the candidate that the UUA matches with us based on our preferences and the minister's preferences, it's like matching for an internship or residency for doctors. We'll have one person that becomes the candidate for our congregation come here and spend 10 days with us, delivering a sermon the first Sunday, meeting with everyone during the week, delivering a sermon the second Sunday, and then hopefully taking a congregational vote that will be positive. The UUA says unless you're 95% positive, it's not a good match and you should keep searching. So, knock on wood, we'll do all of our work in the fall finding out who we are and where we want to go. And then we'll be able to match those visions that you all have with the candidates' capacities. I'll be around if there's any other questions and there's an email. We had a retreat yesterday. We now have a covenant. It will be posted on the website. We're getting very organized. So see you soon.
First off, I'd like to thank Donnie Davis for putting this program together and for Jennica Davis-Hockett to present today. It's interesting to hear from the national representative and our local person. They did an excellent job. Let's give them a good big round of applause. Yeah, I was just getting to that. I want to thank Tristan on the Zoom and the cameras and the sound. We couldn't have done this summer program without Tristan. It's just so great to have him. Thank you, Tristan. And thanks, Linda, for giving us the update on the search for the new minister. It's so important. This is our future, and we want everyone to be involved. I hope you're considering at least reading that book, Search, that I mentioned last time. It's about another community in California. It's a novel, but it gives you an idea of maybe what we're in for. Not exactly right, but it's an interesting read anyway. Two other things. Next week, we're going to have our last summer forum, and it's going to be on mental health, homelessness, dignity, and justice. That's the title, and talk about important subjects. And we want you to listen, be on Zoom, and be ready with your questions. Sherry Whitwer from our congregation, whose background is in mental health, will be our presenter, and I think it'll be an excellent one with lots of stimulating issues for further discussion. And then finally, we've got a little add-on that I'm working on. I still have to coordinate with Tristan, but this was one of the topics that didn't make the cut, the original list of summer forum programs, but I think it's an important one, especially an important one now. The title is going to be the Utah Legislature, What You Didn't Learn in Civics Class. And Liz Waite, who's a representative up at the state capitol, the Utah Legislature, and Suzanne Harrison, who was in the legislature but got her district voted out from under her thanks to gerrymandering, which was also a summer forum topic. They will be doing a panel to discuss these issues and to field your questions. And this is a really important election coming up this year, this fall, because our democracy is at stake. So I hope everyone's paying attention. The date for that is going to be August 31st. It's a Wednesday evening at 7:30. We're still working on that. It might be adjusted, but please mark your calendar for that, and we'll have an opportunity to remind you how you can get involved in this critical fall election season. That's it. Thanks, everybody. Meet two new friends out in social hour. Thank you.
Thank you, and please remember to put your sticky note. I'm so excited to read everybody's on our Youth Inclusive Spiritual Community Board.